The Emergency Council Session. The Grand Chamber of the Galactic Council hung suspended in the void between stars, a massive structure of crystalline walls and holographic displays that had witnessed 1,000 years of interstellar diplomacy. Today, however, the usual atmosphere of measured debate had given way to something far more sinister. Ambassador Maya Rodriguez stood at Earth's observation platform, her dark eyes scanning the circular chamber where representatives from 63 species had gathered for an emergency session. The air itself seemed to vibrate with tension as the translation matrices hummed, converting thousands of languages into comprehensible streams of communication. Maya had served as humanity's voice to the galaxy for 8 years now, navigating trade agreements, territorial disputes, and countless cultural misunderstandings. But nothing in her experience had prepared her for this moment, when the machinery of galactic government would be turned toward the deliberate extinction of an entire species. The Sylvari stood accused, and their fate hung by the thinnest of threads. At the center of the chamber, on a platform designed to isolate the condemned, stood Elder Lefara of the Sylvari Council. She was a striking figure, even in her distress. The Sylvari were humanoid in basic structure, but their skin held an iridescent quality that shifted to subtle shades of blue and silver, depending on their emotional state. Right now, Lefara's skin had gone nearly transparent with fear, revealing the delicate network of bioluminescent veins beneath. Her people numbered only 52 million across their homeworld of Sylvara Prime and 3 small colony moons. They were artists, philosophers, and scientists who had achieved spaceflight only 3 centuries ago. Their culture valued harmony, knowledge, and the careful study of the universe's mysteries. They had no standing military beyond basic system defense, no history of aggression, and no apparent reason to be standing trial for their very existence. High Chancellor Vorthak of the Draknor Empire was speaking, his massive reptilian form dominating the central podium. The Draknor were ancient, powerful, and utterly without mercy when it came to protecting what they considered their interests. Vorthak's scales were a deep crimson, a color that signified righteous anger in Draknor culture, and his voice boomed through the chamber with the weight of absolute certainty. "The evidence before this council is irrefutable," he declared, his clawed hand gesturing toward the holographic displays that surrounded the chamber. Intercepted communications between Sylvari research facilities discussing weapons development. Testimony from multiple reliable sources within their colonies confirming the existence of secret military installations. Unauthorized technological advancements that could only have been achieved through the theft of restricted military research from Draknor archives. And most damning of all, intelligence suggesting a coordinated plan to strike at Draknor mining operations across 3 sectors. The displays showed what appeared to be damning evidence. Sylvari scientists discussing energy projection systems, facility schematics that could be interpreted as military installations, and technological progress that seemed impossibly rapid for such a young spacefaring species. Vorthak continued, his voice dropping to a tone of grave concern that Maya recognized as calculated political theater. "We do not bring this matter before the Council lightly. The Draknor Empire has no desire to see any species exterminated, but the safety of the galactic community must take precedence over sentiment. The Sylvari represent a clear and present danger. They have demonstrated hostile intent. They possess stolen military technology, and they are positioned to strike at critical infrastructure that supplies fuel to half the galaxy. Under Galactic Protocol 7, we have no choice but to act decisively before they can execute their plans." Maya had spent the past 2 weeks investigating every piece of evidence the Draknor had presented, and yet she had discovered made her blood run cold. Not because the Sylvari were dangerous, but because the fabrication was so blatant, so cynically constructed, that it revealed the true depths of galactic politics. The intercepted communications were genuine Sylvari scientific discussions, but they had been deliberately mistranslated. The Sylvari word for energy projection was the same term they used for their solar collection systems. Civilian technology they were developing to reduce their dependence on imported fuel. The testimony came from sources who were either Draknor corporate agents or individuals heavily in debt to Draknor financial institutions. The secret military installations were agricultural research stations working on food production for their growing colonies. And the stolen military technology was nothing more than advances in medical scanning and water purification, civilian applications of basic physics that any species would eventually discover. But the most damning truth was the one that would never appear in any official record. The Sylvari homeworld and their colony moons sat atop the largest deposit of quantum crystals ever discovered. These rare formations were essential for the most advanced faster-than-light drives, and they were worth more than entire solar systems. The Draknor Empire's own quantum crystal mines were depleting rapidly, and their economy was heavily dependent on maintaining their monopoly on FTL technology sales. The Sylvari didn't even realize what they were sitting on. Their geological surveys had identified the crystals, but classified them as interesting but relatively useless mineral formations. They had no idea that the ground beneath their feet was worth enough to make them targets of the galaxy's most powerful empire, Earth's lonely stand. Maya activated her translation matrix and stood, the gesture triggering a subtle chime that requested recognition from the council chair. Bizanathar, presiding officer, a being of pure energy contained within a magnetic field, acknowledged her with a pulse of light. The Council recognizes Ambassador Rodriguez of Earth. The translation came through cold and procedural. Maya took a deep breath, knowing that what she was about to do would either save 52 million lives or mark humanity as enemies of the galactic order. Honorable members of the Council, she began, her voice amplified through the chamber's acoustic systems. Earth must formally object to these proceedings. We have conducted our own investigation of the evidence presented by the Draknor Empire, and we have found it to be, at best, fundamentally flawed, and at worst, deliberately fabricated. But the most damning truth was the one that would never appear in any official record. The Sylvari homeworld and their colony moons sat atop the largest deposit of quantum crystals ever discovered. These rare formations were essential for the most advanced faster-than-light drives, and they were worth more than entire solar systems. The Draknor Empire's own quantum crystal mines were depleting rapidly, and their economy was heavily dependent on maintaining their monopoly on FTL technology sales. The Sylvari didn't even realize what they were sitting on. Their geological surveys had identified the crystals, but classified them as interesting but relatively useless mineral formations. They had no idea that the ground beneath their feet was worth enough to make them targets of the galaxy's most powerful empire, Earth's lonely stand. Maya activated her translation matrix and stood, the gesture triggering a subtle chime that requested recognition from the council chair. Bizanathar, presiding officer, a being of pure energy contained within a magnetic field, acknowledged her with a pulse of light. The Council recognizes Ambassador Rodriguez of Earth. The translation came through cold and procedural. Maya took a deep breath, knowing that what she was about to do would either save 52 million lives or mark humanity as enemies of the galactic order. Honorable members of the Council, she began, her voice amplified through the chamber's acoustic systems. Earth must formally object to these proceedings. We have conducted our own investigation of the evidence presented by the Draknor Empire, and we have found it to be, at best, fundamentally flawed, and at worst, deliberately fabricated. The chamber erupted in a cacophony of translated protests, clicking, humming, and vocalizations that the translation matrices struggled to process. Maya pressed on, her voice cutting through the noise. The communications cited as evidence of weapons development are mistranslations of civilian scientific discussions. The Sylvari term Kalashtorn means solar energy collection, not weapon systems. We have verified this with independent linguistic experts from 3 neutral species. The testimony comes exclusively from sources with direct financial ties to Draknor interests. The technological advancements are in agriculture and medicine, not warfare. And the so-called secret military installations are farming research stations, which we have confirmed through our own long-range scans. She paused, letting her gaze sweep across the chamber, making eye contact with as many representatives as possible. But most importantly, we must ask ourselves why this is happening now. The Solvari have been peaceful neighbors for 3 centuries. They have never threatened anyone, never sought conflict, never even maintained a military force beyond basic system defense. Yet suddenly, conveniently, they are declared an existential threat that must be exterminated. Why? Maya activated her own holographic display showing geological survey data that Earth's science vessels had quietly gathered over the past week. Because they are sitting on the largest quantum crystal deposit in known space. Because the Draknor Empire needs those resources. Because it is easier to commit genocide under the cover of Protocol 7 than to engage in fair trade or negotiation. The reaction was immediate and hostile. Vorthak's scales flushed nearly black with rage. How dare you accuse the Draknor Empire of fabricating evidence? Earth is a minor species, barely 300 years into interstellar space, and you presume to lecture civilizations that have existed for millennia. You see conspiracy where there is only prudent security measures. Other species joined in, particularly Gov, with close economic ties to the Draknor. The Krell ambassador, whose species relied heavily on Draknor trade agreements, stood and declared, "Earth's naivety is showing. The galaxy is not a safe place, Ambassador Rodriguez. Sometimes difficult decisions must be made to protect the majority from the dangerous few." Maya stood her ground, her voice steady despite the hostility washing over her from every direction. "I understand that the galaxy can be dangerous. Humanity learned that lesson the hard way during our own history. We know what it means to face difficult choices. But we also know what happens when fear and greed are allowed to masquerade as justice. We know what happens when the powerful can eliminate the weak simply by manufacturing accusations. We know what happens when good people stand by and do nothing while atrocities are committed in their name." She turned specifically toward elderly Sarah, who stood trembling on her isolated platform, her iridescent skin flickering with barely contained terror. "The Solvari are not terrorists. They are not a threat. They are a young species barely learning to navigate interstellar politics, and they are being sacrificed for profit." Maya's voice hardened, taking on an edge that made several representatives lean forward in their seats. Earth formally requests a 6-month independent investigation before any vote is taken. We request that a neutral coalition examine the evidence without Draknor influence. We request that the Solvari be given the opportunity to defend themselves properly, with adequate time to prepare their case and present counter-evidence. This is the bare minimum that any sentient species deserve before being condemned to extinction. The Xanathar presiding officer pulsed with what the translation matrix interpreted as reluctance. "The request is noted, Ambassador Rodriguez. However, High Chancellor Vorthak has invoked the emergency provision of Protocol 7, which requires an immediate vote when a credible existential threat has been identified. The evidence has been presented. The arguments have been heard. We must now proceed to the vote." Maya felt her heart sink, but she refused to show despair. "Then let the record show that Earth considers this vote to be illegitimate, a mockery of the principles upon which this council was founded. Let the record show that we do not recognize any decision made without proper investigation and due process." The voting began, each species signaling their decision through their individual communication systems. The display above the chamber showed the tally in real time, and Maya watched in growing horror as species after species voted in favor of Protocol 7 enforcement. The Krell voted yes. The Thandorians voted yes. The Vex Collective voted yes. Species that Earth had considered friends, partners in exploration and scientific exchange were voting to exterminate 52 million innocent beings. Some abstained, unwilling to support the obvious injustice, but too afraid of Draknor economic retaliation to vote against it. But abstentions counted as consent under Protocol 7's rules. Only an active vote against could stop the machinery of extinction, and as the numbers climbed, it became clear that no such vote was coming. 40 species voted yes. 15 abstained. 7 voted no, but their reasons were procedural rather than moral. They simply felt the evidence was insufficient, not that the entire proceeding was fundamentally wrong. The final tally appeared on the displays: 55 in favor of Sylvari extermination, 7 opposed on technical grounds, and 1 vote that stood alone in outright rejection of the entire proceeding. Earth. Elder Lysara's iridescent skin had gone completely transparent, the bioluminescent veins beneath pulsing erratically with shock and grief. Around her, the holographic displays showed the verdict. Protocol 7 approved for immediate enforcement. The Sylvari species had 30 days to evacuate their world, after which the Galactic Enforcement Fleet would sterilize all 4 bodies, Sylvara Prime and the 3 colony moons. Sterilization was the clinical term. What it meant in practice was orbital bombardment, atmospheric burning, and the complete eradication of all life down to the microbial level. 52 million people had just been sentenced to death by committee, and the galaxy was already moving on to the next item on the agenda. Maya stood frozen for a moment, her mind racing through options, calculating possibilities, and finding them all equally desperate. Earth's military was small, barely 200 capital ships, designed primarily for system defense and exploration support. The Draknor Empire alone could field 3,000 warships, and they would have the backing of the entire Galactic Enforcement Fleet if Earth interfered. Fighting was impossible. Negotiation had failed. The vote was final, with no appeals process built into Protocol 7. But Maya thought about the Sylvari children she had seen in the cultural exchange programs, the artists whose work had moved her to tears, the scientists whose discoveries had advanced human understanding of quantum mechanics. She thought about what it meant to be human, to carry the lessons of Earth's own dark history into the stars. Ambassador Rodriguez, the Xanathar presiding officer's translated voice cut through her thoughts. The vote is concluded. Earth's objection has been noted for the record. The council will now adjourn for... Maya interrupted, her voice ringing through the chamber with a clarity and force that made even Vorthok pause. I am not finished. The temperature in the chamber seemed to drop. Interrupting a presiding officer was a serious breach of protocol, but Maya was far beyond caring about diplomatic niceties. She activated her communication system, broadcasting not just to the council chamber, but to every major news network, every diplomatic channel, every public forum that could carry her words across the galaxy. Let the record show that Earth does not recognize this vote as legitimate, she declared, her words carefully chosen, each one weighted with consequence. We consider Protocol 7, as applied in this case, to be a violation of the fundamental rights of sentient beings. We consider it genocide disguised as security protocol. We consider it murder sanctioned by fear and greed. The chamber was utterly silent now, every representative watching with a mixture of shock and fascination. No species had ever rejected a Protocol 7 vote before. The implications were staggering, but Maya continued, her voice never wavering. Therefore, Earth hereby extends an offer of asylum to any and all Sylvari citizens who can reach our borders. We will not surrender them to this illegal sentence. We will protect them as if they were our own people. Because from this moment forward, any Sylvari who accepts our protection becomes a citizen of Earth, with all the rights and protections that entails. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Vorthak's roar of outrage was so loud that the translation matrices temporarily overloaded. This is an act of war. Earth cannot harbor fugitives from galactic justice. You are a minor species with no military capability. You will be crushed. Other voices joined in, some outraged, others confused, a few expressing what might have been admiration for humanity's audacity. But Maya wasn't finished. She turned to face Elderly Sara directly, her voice softening slightly. Elderly Sara, please inform your people. Earth's borders are open. Our orbital stations, our colonies, our homeworld itself will shelter any Sylvari who can reach us. We have already begun preparing refugee facilities. We will provide everything you need: housing, medical care, education, and protection. Lysara's skin flickered with a color Maya had never seen before, a deep gold that the translation matrices identified as profound gratitude mixed with desperate hope. But Ambassador, your species will face the consequences. The Draknor will not allow this. The Council will not allow this. You will be placing your entire civilization at risk for people you barely know. Maya smiled, and in that smile was the weight of humanity's entire history, all the mistakes and lessons, all the darkness and light that had shaped her species. Elderly Sarah, let me tell you something about humanity. We are pack animals. We evolved in small tribes on a dangerous world, and we survived because we protected each other, even at great personal cost. We carry that instinct with us to the stars. She turned back to the council, her voice rising to address them all. Humanity spent thousands of years making terrible mistakes. We committed genocides against our own people. We enslaved, we murdered, we destroyed in the name of profit and power and ideology. We nearly exterminated ourselves a dozen times over. But we learned. We looked at our own history with horror and we said never again. We meant it for ourselves and we mean it for anyone who seeks our protection. Maya's voice hardened again, taking on an edge of steel. The Silvari are innocent. The evidence against them is fabricated. This vote is a sham designed to legitimize theft and murder. Earth will not be complicit in genocide, regardless of the consequences. We invite any species that values justice over politics to join us in protecting the Silvari. But whether you join us or not, our position is clear and final. The news reached Silvara Prime through official channels first. But within minutes, it was spreading through every communication network, every public forum, every family gathering across the Silvari homeworld and their 3 colony moons. Elder Lysara's emergency broadcast appeared simultaneously on millions of screens, her iridescent skin flickering with barely controlled emotion as she delivered the impossible news. The Galactic Council had voted for their extinction, but Earth, a species most Silvari barely knew existed, had offered them sanctuary. The reaction was a complex mixture of terror, disbelief, and desperate hope. 52 million people had just learned they had 30 days to live unless they could somehow evacuate their entire civilization. In the capital city of Luminara, Silvari engineer Kelphos stood on his apartment balcony, watching the sunset turn the sky shades of purple and gold that would never look quite the same on any other world. His wife Lyria joined him, their 2 children, 6-year-old Sarah and 9-year-old Torin, clutching at their parents' hands with confusion written across their young faces. "Papa, do we really have to leave?" Sarah asked, her voice small and frightened. "The broadcast said our home is going to be destroyed. Why would anyone want to destroy our home?" Kelphos knelt down to his daughter's eye level, trying to find words that could explain galactic politics to a 6-year-old when he barely understood it himself. "Sometimes, sweetheart, powerful people want things by belong to others, and they're willing to hurt those people to take what they want. But there are also people who stand up to protect those being hurt. The humans are doing that for us." Lyria's skin had gone pale with stress, the bioluminescent patterns beneath barely visible. "Kale, the broadcast said they can only evacuate 10,000 people. 10,000 out of 52 million. They're opening a lottery system because they can't decide who lives and who dies any other way." The weight of those numbers crashed down on them all. Their species had no faster-than-light capable military vessels, no civilian fleet large enough for mass evacuation. The handful of ancient transport ships they possessed, pulled from museums and hastily recommissioned, could carry perhaps 10,000 people at maximum capacity on the 3-week journey to Earth's borders. That meant 99.98% of their population would remain behind to face the Galactic Enforcement Fleet sterilization protocol. Across the 4 Silvari worlds, impossible scenes were playing out. Families gathering to decide whether to enter the lottery together or separately, trying to calculate whether better odds came from submitting individual entries or ensuring that if one went, all could go. Scientists and artists arguing about who was more essential to preserving Silvari culture. Elderly individuals refusing to enter the lottery at all, insisting that the young deserve the chance more. Children too young to understand why their parents were crying, holding them tight while trying to explain concepts like extinction and survival. The lottery system was simple and brutal in its fairness. Every Silvari could register. Family units would be kept together, and a computer would select randomly. No preference for the wealthy, the influential, or the talented. Just pure chance, deciding who would live to see another gone, and who would remain to witness their world's ending. Kael'thas made the decision quickly, his engineer's mind calculating odds and accepting the reality. We register as a family. If we're selected, we go together. If not, he didn't finish the sentence. They all knew what if not meant. The registration process was handled through public terminals, set up in every city, every settlement, every outpost across the 4 worlds. Lines stretched for miles, Silvari waiting patiently to enter their names into the system that would determine their fate. There was no pushing, no fighting, no desperate attempts to game the system. That wasn't the Silvari way. They had built their civilization on principles of order, harmony, and collective good. Even facing extinction, they maintained their dignity. The Armada arrives. The Galactic Enforcement Fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at Earth's borders exactly 3 weeks after the Silvari refugees had arrived at Luna Station. High Executive Vorthok commanded the fleet from his flagship, the Absolute Authority, a massive Draknor dreadnought that had enforced Protocol 7 3 times before. This was supposed to be routine. Arrive, issue ultimatum, watch the target species realize their mistake, and surrender the refugees. If they didn't surrender, a brief demonstration of force would convince them. It had worked every other time. The galaxy's lesser species always backed down when faced with real military might. Vorthok stood on his command bridge, his crimson scales polished to perfection, surrounded by tactical displays showing his fleet. 3,200 warships drawn from 26 species. It was overwhelming force. More than enough to reduce Earth's pathetic 200-ship defense fleet to debris in a matter of hours. He had initially thought this assignment beneath him, but High Chancellor Vorthok's personal orders had been clear. Make an example of humanity. Show the galaxy what happens when minor species defy the established order. Crush them quickly, take the Silvari refugees, and restore proper respect for galactic authority. Communications, Vorthok ordered, his voice carrying the confidence of someone who had never known military defeat. Broadcast on all Earth frequencies, standard Protocol 7 enforcement language. The message transmitted across every communication channel, ensuring humanity would receive it clearly. This is High Executive Vorthok of the Galactic Enforcement Fleet to the government of Earth. You are harboring fugitives from legally enacted Protocol 7. You have 72 hours to surrender all Silvari refugees to our custody for proper enforcement. Failure to comply will result in Earth being classified as accomplices to violations of galactic security. Protocol 7 enforcement will be extended to include all human settlements, stations, and vessels. You have 72 hours. Choose survival. The message was received at UN headquarters in New York at 14:37 GMT on a Friday afternoon. President Sarah Chen read it 3 times, then walked to the window of her office, looking out at the city below. 8 billion humans lived on Earth, with another 2 billion across various colonies and stations. She was about to put all of them at risk, because her species had decided that protecting 10,000 refugees was worth any cost. The weight of that decision was crushing, but she never hesitated. She had authorized Ambassador Rodriguez's declaration. She had activated Protocol Sanctuary. Earth's course was set, and there would be no turning back now. The Security Council meeting lasted only 20 minutes. Every representative had known this moment was coming. They had prepared their response weeks ago. Ambassador Maya Rodriguez was authorized to deliver humanity's answer from her position on the Defiant Line, where she had insisted on being present alongside the military forces. Her message was transmitted back to Vorthok on all the same frequencies his ultimatum had used. High Executive Vorthok, this is Ambassador Sarah Chen speaking on behalf of Earth and all human settlements. The Silvari citizens you refer to are now legally recognized members of humanity's collective civilization, granted full protection under our laws and Constitution. Maya's voice was calm, steady, carrying none of the fear she felt, but all of the conviction that had brought humanity to this moment. We do not recognize Protocol 7 as legitimate in this case, as it was enacted based on fabricated evidence and represents genocide for economic gain. We will not surrender our citizens to illegal execution. The Silvari refugees have committed no crimes. They posed no threat to galactic security, They are innocent people who were condemned to death because they had the misfortune of living on worlds that powerful interests wanted to steal. Earth stands in defense of the innocent, as we always will. On the bridge of absolute authority, Verthok's scales flushed darker with what humans would recognize as contempt. He activated his response channel, not bothering to hide his amusement. Ambassador Rodriguez, perhaps you fail to comprehend the situation. We have 3,200 warships. Our intelligence indicates Earth possesses fewer than 250 capital ships. Your defensive capabilities are primitive by galactic standards. Your orbital platforms are insufficient. Your military personnel are undertrained compared to galactic forces. This is not a negotiation you can win. Surrender the fugitives, accept a minor censure from the Council, and Earth can return to its insignificant but peaceful existence. Maya's response would be recorded, studied, and quoted by historians for centuries afterward. High Executive, I don't think you understand humanity at all. We're not trying to win a negotiation. We're not calculating odds or considering political consequences. We're drawing a line. When humans draw a line to protect the innocent, we don't move it because someone threatens us with superior firepower. We don't back down because the math doesn't favor us. We don't surrender our principles because defending them is difficult. Her voice hardened, taking on an edge that made even Admiral Chen Wei glance over in approval. You have 72 hours to withdraw your fleet from Earth's borders. After that time, we will consider your continued presence an act of war against human sovereign space. Choose wisdom, High Executive. Choose to walk away from genocide. Verthok actually laughed, the sound rumbling through the translation systems. 72 hours? You're giving us an ultimatum? Ambassador, you've condemned your entire species to demonstrate your naive idealism. History will record this as the moment humanity chose extinction over rational self-preservation. Use your 72 hours to evacuate your civilians, because when this fleet moves forward, nothing will stop us. The channel closed. The two fleets faced each other across the void. 3,200 enforcement fleet warships on one side, Earth's small official military on the other. The galaxy watched through monitoring stations and news networks, most observers certain they were about to witness humanity's quick surrender or destruction. The betting odds on various galactic networks heavily favored the enforcement fleet. Some species placed wagers on how many hours the battle would last. Others bet on whether Earth would surrender before the first shot was fired. But then something happened that no one in the enforcement fleet expected. Space itself began to shimmer with energy signatures that shouldn't exist. Faster than light transit points opened across a massive volume of space, dozens of them, then hundreds, then thousands. Every sensor on every enforcement fleet vessel simultaneously went haywire, detecting massive gravimetric anomalies, energy patterns suggesting fleet movements on a scale that defied comprehension. Vorthok's sensor officer was shouting reports, his voice climbing in pitch with each impossible reading. High Executive, multiple FTL signatures, hundreds, no, thousands of vessels emerging. Energy readings are... Sir, I don't understand these numbers. There are too many ships. And then they appeared. The volunteer fleet materialized from faster-than-light travel in waves. 43,000 ships of every description dropping into normal space in a carefully coordinated arrival that had taken weeks of planning and preparation. They weren't just arriving at random. They were forming up in defensive formations, creating overlapping fields of fire, positioning themselves to make every engagement cost the enforcement fleet dearly. Ancient colony ships that should have been decommissioned decades ago, their massive hulls now carrying missile batteries and fighter bays. Cargo haulers converted into mobile weapons platforms. Mining vessels with their industrial equipment recalibrated for combat. Science ships with experimental technology. Luxury liners transformed into carrier craft. Personal yachts armed with whatever weapons their owners could mount. The names painted on their hulls told humanity's story. Remember New Terra, never again, humanity's shield. For the innocent, stand together, defiant hope, unity's price, sanctuary guard. And at the center of this impossible armada, leading them all, was the defiant line. Admiral Chen Wei's restored dreadnought, broadcasting a message that would echo across the galaxy. The tactical displays on Absolute Authority's bridge painted a picture that Vorthak's tactical officers initially refused to believe. The numbers were impossible. Earth's official military of 207 ships had been manageable, but 43,000 vessels, even converted civilian craft, changed everything. The tactical simulations began running automatically, calculating engagement outcomes, and every single model showed catastrophic enforcement fleet casualties. High Executive, Vorthak's chief tactical officer reported, his voice shaking slightly. The fleet composition is unprecedented. Most are converted civilian vessels with improvised weapons, but the sheer numbers create overlapping defensive zones. If we engage, our losses will be... Sir, we're looking at 60 to 70% casualties minimum. That's assuming we achieve complete victory, which would require sustained combat over multiple engagements. The human ships are positioning to force close-range combat, where numerical superiority outweighs technological advantages. Vorthak stared at the tactical displays, his scales unconsciously shifting colors as his brain processed what he was seeing. This wasn't a military defense. This was an entire species civilian population voluntarily throwing themselves into the path of danger. Merchants, miners, colonists, families, they had all answered some call that Vorthak couldn't comprehend and converted their ships into weapons to defend refugees they had never met. It was insane. It was irrational. It was the most terrifying display of collective determination Vorthak had ever witnessed in his 3 centuries of military service. The Admiral's Challenge. Admiral Chen Wei opened a communication channel that broadcast to every ship in both fleets, ensuring that every crew member on both sides would hear his words. His elderly face appeared on displays across thousands of vessels, showing every wine earned through decades of service, every gray hair that spoke of hard-won wisdom. High Executive Vorthak, this is Admiral James Chen Wei commanding the Terran Defense Fleet. You came here expecting to face Earth's dilatory, a manageable threat that you could sweep aside with minimal losses. You thought we would calculate the odds, realize we couldn't win, and surrender the refugees to save ourselves. You were wrong about everything. He paused, and the tactical displays behind him showed the full scope of the volunteer fleet. 43,000 ships, filling the space between the enforcement fleet and Earth. What you're facing now isn't Earth's military. It's Earth. All of Earth. Every human who could crew a ship, mount a weapon, or volunteer to stand in your way. We're merchants who should be trading goods, miners who should be extracting asteroids, scientists who should be studying stars, families who should be living peaceful lives. But we look at 10,000 Sylvari children, artists, scientists, and elders, and we couldn't stand aside while you murdered them for profit. Vorthak activated his response, his voice dripping with contempt. Admiral, your people are brave, I'll grant you that. Brave and foolish. Most of your volunteer fleet consists of converted civilian vessels with improvised weapons. Against proper military craft, they'll be destroyed easily. You're sacrificing millions of your own people for refugees you barely know. This is madness. Chen Wei's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes hardened. Let me tell you something about humanity, High Executive. We spent 10,000 years fighting each other. Wars over territory, resources, ideology, religion. We nearly destroyed ourselves more times than I can count. Brothers killing brothers, nations burning nations, genocide after genocide staining our history with blood. But we learned. We looked at what we had done to ourselves and we said, never again. His voice grew stronger, resonating with conviction that came from the deepest core of human identity. We meant it for ourselves, and we mean it for anyone who seeks our protection. The Sylvari aren't refugees anymore, Vorthak. They're family. And humans protect family, even when it's not rational, even when the odds are against us, even when it costs us everything. That's not madness, that's purpose. He gestured to the displays showing the volunteer fleet. Every person crewing these ships made a choice. They made their choice purposefully. They didn't choose to be casualties. They chose crews, captains, owners, and benevolent police forces. You're looking at millions of humans who decided that standing between you and innocent people matters more than their own safety. The communication channel filled with background noise, as human crew members across 43,000 ships responded with cheers, affirmations, and declarations of resolve. Chen Wei let it continue for a moment, letting Vorthak hear the voice of humanity's collective will, then continued. Your tactical officers have already run the simulations. You know what happens if you attack. Yes, you'll probably win eventually. Your ships have better shields, better weapons, better armor, but you'll lose 60 to 70% of your fleet in the process. Thousands of your ships destroyed, tens of thousands of your personnel killed. And for what? To enforce a Protocol 7 vote that everyone now knows was based on fabricated evidence? To help the Draknor Empire steal quantum crystal deposits? But other voices were rising, species that had long chafed under the dominance of the powerful few. The Taurians, a relatively young spacefaring species with only 4 colony worlds, spoke words that resonated across the chamber. Perhaps galactic law deserves to collapse if it can be so easily manipulated to serve genocide. Perhaps we should be asking why it took a species as young as humanity to show us that some laws are unjust and must be opposed. The independent journalists and investigators who had been examining the Draknor evidence against the Sylvari released their findings simultaneously across multiple networks. The fabrication was undeniable when examined by neutral experts. The communications had been deliberately mistranslated. The testimony had been bought. The technological assessments had been manipulated. The entire case for Sylvari extermination was built on lies, and the documentation proving it was now public. The scandal exploded across galactic networks. Species that had voted for Protocol 7 enforcement found themselves facing domestic outrage. Politicians who had supported the vote were called to explain their decisions. The Draknor Empire's representatives went into crisis management mode, but the damage was done. Everyone could see the truth now. The Sylvari had been condemned to death not because they were dangerous, but because they were inconveniently located on top of valuable resources. On Sylvara Prime, the 49 million Sylvari who had remained behind watched the standoff through their final days. They knew they were doomed. The 30-day evacuation deadline had passed, and the enforcement fleet would return to complete Protocol 7 enforcement whether they defeated Earth or not. But seeing humanity's defiance, watching millions of humans risk everything to protect 10,000 Sylvari they had never met, gave meaning to their final hours. They weren't being forgotten. They were dying unnoticed. Somewhere in the galaxy, someone cared enough to stand against injustice. She looked directly at Vorthak, meeting the Draknor High Chancellor's rage-filled gaze without flinching. If you want the Sylvari refugees, you will have to go through Earth, through our fleet, through our orbital defenses, through every human being who volunteers to stand between you and innocent people. We are drawing a line, High Chancellor, and when humanity draws a line, we do not move it because someone threatens us. The chamber descended into chaos, species arguing, shouting, and gesturing in their various forms of communication. The Xanathar presiding officer was pulsing frantically, trying to restore order. But through it all, Maya stood steady. Her message delivered, her species committed to a course that would either save 52 million lives or doom Earth to galactic isolation and possible destruction. As the session finally adjourned in complete disarray, Maya received a private communication from Admiral Jane Zakonjo, commander of Earth's defense fleet. His face appeared on her personal display, grave but determined. Ambassador, I've been monitoring the session. The Joint Chiefs are meeting in 2 hours, but I can tell you right now what the decision will be. Earth's military stands behind your declaration. We're activating Protocol Sanctuary. Maya felt tears threatening, but held them back. Protocol Sanctuary was Earth's contingency plan for exactly this scenario, the plan they had hoped never to use. It meant total mobilization, every resource dedicated to defense, every civilian volunteer organization activated, every orbital platform converted to support refugee operations. It meant Earth was going to war, not for conquest or resources or ideology, but for principle. Thank you, Admiral, she said quietly. I hope I haven't just doomed our species. Okonjo's expression softened slightly. Ambassador, you've given our species something to fight for. That's worth more than you know. Every military officer, every enlisted personnel, every civilian in our chain of command joined because they believed Earth stood for something. You just showed the galaxy what that is. We won't let you down. As the communication closed, Maya looked out through the crystalline walls of a council chamber at the stars beyond. Somewhere out there, 52 million Sylvari were learning that they had been condemned to death. But they were also learning that one species, one group of humans they barely knew, had just put everything on the line to save them. The galaxy was watching, waiting to see if Earth's idealism would survive contact with reality. Maya knew the coming days would test humanity in ways they hadn't been tested since the dark days of their own world wars. But she also knew with absolute certainty that they had made the right choice. The line had been drawn. Now came the hard part, holding it.